Good evening. Welcome to This Week in Turkey. Tonight we're joined by Joost Hiltermann, who is the Middle East and North Africa Program Director at the International Crisis Group, and we will be talking about Turkey's changing position within the context of the Syrian conflict. Good evening, Mr. Hiltermann. Welcome to This Week in Turkey.
Good evening, and thank you for having me on your show.
So, in an article you published this week in The Atlantic magazine, which is titled, Turkey Made a Bet Against Assad and Lost, you have suggested that, and I quote, with impulsive and mercurial leaders in both Washington and Ankara, no one can say how Turkey will navigate the gathering storm. Can you start by explaining for our viewers what you mean here by impulsive leaders and the gathering storm?
So, well, let me start with the gathering storm, because it's clear that the war in Syria is not going the way that Turkey and the Erdogan government had calculated it would back in 2011. There is now a real possibility that the war will spill over into Turkey, or its effects will spill over into Turkey in three ways. One is through jihadists coming out of Idlib into Turkey as they are being pushed by the regime supported by Russia and Iran in an offensive that is about to start. Secondly is by a new flow of refugees, also from Idlib, because of the same offensive. And thirdly, it's the growing role of the Syrian affiliate of the PKK, the YPG, in northern Syria, which is clearly hostile to Turkey, and that has carved out a zone under its control and supported by the United States. So certainly in 2011, 2012, things didn't look that way. So to the extent that this is happening, I think that there's definitely a risk to Turkey, and I said that it's very hard to predict the future, regardless. But in this case, it's made harder by the fact that there are leaders in both Ankara and Washington, and not only there, also in Saudi Arabia and some other places, who are rather impulsive, I have to say, and rather unpredictable in what they will do. One day they make an enemy, the next day they make friends, and there's nothing inherently wrong with that, but it does make predictions very difficult. So to say what will happen next in Syria and in Turkey in response to what is happening in Syria is very difficult to predict.
Mm-hmm. And it's estimated that thousands of Syrians, both militants and civilians, will seek refuge in Turkey as a result of the Idlib offensive, which is seen as imminent both by the United Nations and by the major powers in the region, including Russia. What kind of an impact do you think this will have on Turkey?
Well, it would have a very harmful impact on Turkey. Turkey is already home to 3.5 million refugees, officially, I think, which is an enormous burden on any country. And so to take in more would maybe tip the balance. It's the drop that that's where the bucket spills over. And it's we're talking from Idlib is a population of just under 3 million people. I don't think all of them will flee toward Turkey, but even a significant portion of that would be a huge addition to what Turkey is already hosting in terms of refugees. And then you add to that the fact that the main groups in control in Idlib today are jihadist groups. And if they are defeated and pushed out of Idlib, they would also come toward Turkey, and Turkey would be saddled with a number of hardened jihadist fighters. And it's very hard to say, what they will do next. So I think this is going to be a really difficult challenge for Turkey.
Mm-hmm. So let's shift our focus a bit right now. You tweeted today about your institutions, the International Crisis Group's report, which will be released on September 5th, about the United States and its Kurdish allies in Syria. Could you elaborate on that a little bit, please?
Yeah, so this is really one of a series of reports we've already published in the past 2 or 3 years about the activities of the YPG, again, the Syrian affiliate of the PKK in northern Syria. This group has grown in northern Syria since 2012, when the Syrian regime essentially vacated the Kurdish areas in the north because it was tied down in the south with the popular uprising. So now this group has carved out what constitutes an autonomous zone, not only in the Kurdish areas, but also further south towards the Euphrates River, in Manbij and Raqqa and Deir ez-Zor. So this is clearly to Turkey, this is a great threat. To the Kurds in Syria, this is a great victory, because obviously they never had any measure of autonomy under the Bashar al-Assad regime. Now we need to look at the fate of this group as we move toward a new stage in the Syrian war, where it is certainly possible that U.S. American troops will withdraw from Syria. President Trump in March announced that he wanted to withdraw American troops. His senior advisors don't agree with him, but in the end, he is the president. We have to see what will happen. We're entering a period of uncertainty, and the YPG enters a period of uncertainty. It doesn't really know what will happen, and therefore it has started talks with the Assad regime in Damascus in order to figure out whether a new arrangement is possible in northern Syria that would preserve some of the Kurdish autonomy, but would also see the integration of these Kurdish fighters into the Syrian armed forces. I'm not sure this is possible, but I think that's what they're talking about right now. And of course, any kind of arrangement, if it is to survive, to work, to function, would have to find agreement from Turkey as well. And I think Turkey will insist that the borders will not stay under control of the YPG, but fall back under the control of the Syrian regime, maybe guaranteed by Russia.
And to conclude, let's proceed with a rather general question. In your opinion, what role does Turkey have in the future of Syria?
Well, so Turkey at the moment still has significant influence because it controls 3 separate areas militarily to different degrees. So in Idlib, Turkey has military observers. That is, of course, a very light military footprint and could easily be changed as a result of a Russian-backed regime offensive. But in any case, Russia would have to be very careful, because if it were to push against Turkey, clearly there would be a conflict between Turkey and Russia, which I think both sides want to avoid. The second area is Afrin, the Kurdish area, which Turkish forces invaded earlier this year. And that remains firmly under Turkish control at the moment. And so does an area to the east of that, the so-called Euphrates Shield area. And there are still some unresolved questions there about the city of Manbij. So these areas give Turkey quite a bit of leverage in any kind of future negotiations. But the Idlib situation is very tenuous, and it's not clear that Turkey will be able to hold on to it. But there are talks ongoing between Russia and Turkey and Iran about what should happen there, and we have to wait to see whether this issue can be resolved peacefully. As for the rest of the border, so in Afrin and north of Manbij, Turkey is in control of the border. We go back to what I mentioned earlier, is that there could be a deal between the YPG and Damascus that would allow Damascus to put its forces on the border, and that would then give some security to Turkey that, in fact, the border is not under threat from the PKK.
Mr. Hiltermann, thank you very much for your comments and for joining us tonight.
It's my pleasure. Thank you so much.
Tonight we were joined by Joost Hiltermann from the International Crisis Group, who commented on the changing position of Turkey in the context of Syria. And now we'll continue with our next news video. Following continued reports of an imminent Syrian army offensive on Idlib, the United Nations warned that the people of Idlib province are facing the prospect of a perfect storm.
Following continued reports of an imminent Syrian army offensive on Idlib, United Nations Syria envoy Staffan de Mistura warned Thursday that the people of Idlib province are facing the prospect of a perfect storm. Russia, Iran and Turkey should take more time to try to avert massive military escalation in Idlib. De Mistura was quoted by Reuters yesterday while speaking to reporters in Geneva. Around 3 million people are currently believed to reside in Idlib, out of which 10,000 are al-Nusra and al-Qaeda terrorists, according to De Mistura. Meanwhile, President Recep Tayyip Erdogan said on Thursday that Ankara was cooperating with Moscow and Tehran to avoid a catastrophe in Syria's militant-held northwestern Idlib province. We are carrying out work together with the Russians and the Iranians to prevent the catastrophe which took place in Aleppo from repeating in Idlib. We are also engaged in talks with the US authorities. We are looking for ways to clear Manbij of terrorists, Erdogan said during a speech in Ankara. Earlier in the day, Russian Deputy Foreign Minister Mikhail Bogdanov had said that Russia was holding consultations with Iran and Turkey, the two other guarantor states of the Syrian truce, about the situation in Idlib. Shortly afterwards, Russia announced it is preparing to hold a week-long military drill in the Mediterranean Sea off the coast of Syria. Moscow's defense ministry said it will deploy 25 ships and 30 jets for the exercises, which would focus on anti-air and anti-submarine defense. The Armada is the biggest task force sent by President Vladimir Putin's government since Russia's intervention in the Syrian conflict in 2015. Meanwhile, Ankara's efforts to sustain ceasefire in Idlib and the joint roadmap with the US over Manbij is slowly progressing, according to Defense Minister Hulusi Akar. Regarding Manbij, there is progress, although a slow one. We constantly remind our partners that the YPG, PKK, must leave the region, Akar said in a speech at a military promotion ceremony in Ankara on Thursday, following a phone call with his Russian counterpart, Sergei Shoigu. We are also striving to maintain the security of some 4 million locals, to continue relief efforts, and to stop attacks to keep the ceasefire in Idlib, he added. We are the only state fighting Daesh face-to-face on ground. While others have been in this fight from air and by other means, our friends fought some 3,000 ISIL members, the most radical ones, in hand-to-hand combat and neutralized them, Akar added. Meanwhile, foreign ministers of the European Union also agreed during a 3-hour meeting on Thursday that the escalation of the situation in Syria's Idlib should be avoided at all costs, a source familiar with the content of the consultations has told Sputnik news agency.
Turkish lira extended its slump on Thursday following rumors that the central bank's deputy governor and rate setter Erkan Kilimci will be resigning from his post.
Yesterday, Reuters reported that the Turkish Central Bank's deputy governor and rate setter Erkan Kilimci is set to resign from his post, according to 3 sources familiar with the matter. The report came 2 weeks before the central bank's Monetary Policy Committee meets to address a slump in the lira. Kilimci had no disagreements with the central bank administration on any issues, including interest rates. His expertise will be employed at another public position, that's all, one senior source told Reuters. Amid reports that the deputy governor might step down, the Turkish lira extended its slide throughout Thursday. The US dollar hit an intraday high of 6.84 lira in earlier action and remained up 4.6% near 6.76 lira. However, the currency found support from a decision announced in the official gazette today to lower the level of withholding tax on lira bank deposits, while raising the level on foreign currency deposits of up to 1 year. It appears to be a step taken to make lira deposit usage more attractive and to make a move from forex to lira deposits profitable, a strategist told Reuters. The central bank has been under pressure from President Recep Tayyip Erdogan not to increase interest rates, despite high inflation and the lira having depreciated more than 40% against the dollar this year. Meanwhile, the slide in the lira is raising concerns about potential ripple effects on other emerging markets and about exposure to Turkey by some European banks. Moreover, the slump in the currency has driven up the cost of fuel and food and heightened concerns about the risk to the country's banks and the broader economy. President Recep Tayyip Erdogan, however, has said that Turkey's economic infrastructure was strong enough to rid itself of the current turmoil, which has been recently targeted by speculators amid a raft of newly imposed US sanctions. Speaking at an award ceremony held by the Radio Television Journalists Association on Wednesday, Erdogan said, "They want to put pressure on us by using the economy. It is impossible for us to step back with such threats. There are structural problems to be solved in Turkey's economy. We already know them, and we are working on the solution," Erdogan added. Similarly, in his remarks published by Hürriyet on Wednesday, Finance Minister Berat Albayrak said, "We do not see a big risk regarding the Turkish economy and financial system, as our economy has strong fundamentals."
Foreign Minister Mevlut Çavuşoğlu said this week that from now on, Turkey will prioritize reforms linked to its European Union accession process.
Foreign Minister Mevlut Çavuşoğlu said this week that from now on, Turkey will prioritize reforms linked to its European Union accession process and is expecting the issue of visa liberalization to be resolved soon. Çavuşoğlu's comments came after a high-level meeting convened to identify steps to advance Turkey's accession bid after a 3-year interval. The Reform Action Group meeting came as Turkey reaches out to Europe amid a currency crisis and tensions with the United States. Çavuşoğlu told reporters that the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Directorate of EU Affairs, will focus on the negotiation chapters on the judiciary, fundamental rights, freedom and security. He also declared that Ankara will cooperate further with the Council of Europe in the upcoming period. In a written statement released after the meeting of the Reform Action Group, Ankara announced that Turkey withdrew the derogation to the European Convention on Human Rights, as foreseen under Article 15 of the Convention after the state of emergency is lifted. The statement also notes that economic threats towards Turkey, statements and the attitude of the United States President Donald Trump administration, which affect the economic system, are a good opportunity for Turkey and the EU to understand each other's value.
Police dispersed a group known as the Saturday Mothers on Saturday as they headed for Istanbul's Galatasaray Square to stage the 700th of their weekly vigils.
Police dispersed a group known as Saturday Mothers on August 25th as they headed for Istanbul's Galatasaray Square to stage their 700th of their weekly demonstrations. The Saturday Mothers have run regular vigils since 1995 in search of their disappeared relatives. For decades, the mothers have been calling for an independent commission to look into the unexplained fate of their relatives missing since Turkey's 1980 coup and during 3 decades of conflict centered on the mainly Kurdish southeast. Police officers on Istiklal Avenue warned the group that the vigil was banned by the Beyoğlu District Authority, asserting that social media linked to the outlawed Kurdistan Workers' Party, PKK, had been used by organizers, a claim denied by Saturday Mothers as a group. As the group refused to leave the scene, police used tear gas and plastic bullets on the crowd before detaining the remaining protesters. Among the participants of Saturday's attempted vigil were members of parliament from the main opposition Republican People's Party, CHP, and the pro-Kurdish People's Democratic Party, HDP. In a statement he made a day after the protests, Interior Minister Süleyman Soylu said that the protests were linked to the PKK and that the participants were trying to victimize themselves through motherhood and using it to mask terrorism. Soylu also added that any further Saturday vigils will be banned by the local authorities. Following Soylu's remarks, Özgür Özel from the main opposition CHP said, Minister Soylu's remarks show that the government is admitting to the existence of a deep state in Turkey, whose past fascist practices are currently being veiled by the AKP. Moreover, the incident was brought to the parliament by the HDP, demanding the police brutality to be investigated and responsible officers to undergo trial. Earlier today, the Saturday Mothers issued a statement saying that they will be at their usual place next weekend, and that they would like to hold a meeting with the President Recep Tayyip Erdogan to discuss Soylu's remarks about the banning of the vigils. Saturday Mothers' last meeting with the then Prime Minister Erdogan was in 2011. The meeting was described by Erdogan as very emotional, who had promised to help them with their cause.
That's all from This Week in Turkey. Thanks for tuning in and hope to see you again next Friday at 9 p.m. Goodbye.